Welcome to Storytime Audio, where we bring you captivating tales that tug at your heartstrings and ignite your imagination. Today, we delve into a gripping story of love, betrayal, and resilience. Join us as we follow Jack, a man whose seemingly perfect life unravels with a sudden revelation. Stay tuned as we explore the depths of human emotion and the journey towards healing and self-discovery. Sit back, relax, and let the story unfold. Jack had a sudden realization, much like in cartoons when a light bulb pops up above a character's head when they have an idea or an answer to a question. It turned out that Emma, his third child, wasn't actually biologically his. She belonged to another man. Jack was on the phone with David, a representative from the DNA testing company, trying to figure out why his daughter's DNA test hadn't been processed after 10 weeks. He had given it to her as an extra New Year's Eve gift and had provided David with the necessary numbers to track it down. After waiting for about 5 minutes, David got back on the line and assured Jack that the test had been processed. However, he explained that this was a confidentiality matter between the company and the person who had taken the test, so he couldn't give any additional information. Jack asked, "If you processed it, why doesn't it show up on my DNA results?" David replied somewhat irritably, "Sir, there are several reasons why your daughter may not appear in your DNA matches, but I can't discuss this specific test with you." That's when it hit Jack like a light bulb going off in his head. The number one reason she doesn't show up in his matches is because she's not biologically related to him. He ended the call in a daze, remembering pressing the red end call button and then breaking down in tears. He woke up a few minutes later, curled up on the couch in the family room. He still had 15 minutes left before his lunch break, so he decided to call Emma, who was probably on her lunch break as well since they both worked in the same time zone. He knew she usually enjoyed lunch while reading a book at her desk, so he wasn't concerned about bothering her. She picked up the phone after the first ring and greeted him with a somewhat weary tone. "Hi Daddy, how are you?" Jack responded, "Sweetheart, you know I love and trust you completely, but I found out about the DNA test. I called the genealogy company, and they told me it was processed about 2 weeks ago." There was a moment of silence, and he could hear her taking a deep breath on the other end of the line. "I know, Dad, we need to talk, but I can't do it here and now. Call me tonight and please make sure Mom isn't in the room when you do." Jack felt like a blur as he drove back to the office. He had to admit that he didn't have a very productive afternoon at the engineering firm where he worked. His mind was in turmoil with countless thoughts and questions, especially the unsettling idea that his beloved daughter might not really be his own. Being naturally analytical, Jack realized he needed to sort things out and deal with each issue methodically. After all, he held the position of VP of Engineering for a reason, and he understood that treating personal problems as if they were project challenges was the way to go. Jack met Linda during his sophomore year at university. They didn't cross paths until his senior year, but ever since then, it felt like they were joined at the hip, at least from his perspective. They tied the knot a year after graduating from college, a solid 31 years ago to this very day. Jack proudly proclaimed that it was the best decision he ever made. At 54, Linda still carried her beauty gracefully, and despite giving birth to 3 kids, she maintained a workout routine that kept her looking like she was in her 30s. She was a bundle of fun and humor, and until today, he eagerly anticipated spending the rest of his life with her. Around 8 p.m., Jack informed Linda that he needed to make a call to the old man regarding a project they were collaborating on and excused himself from the room. In actuality, he grabbed his jacket and headed out to the porch swing where he could have a conversation without worrying about Linda overhearing. That's when he dialed Emma's number. Emma picked up on the very first ring, her voice carrying unmistakable distress. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know I should have told you earlier, but Mom asked me to keep quiet until she had a chance to talk to you," she whispered before Jack could even say hello. "Hey, I'm not angry with you. Take a deep breath," Jack replied, doing his best to comfort her. "I'm not pointing fingers at you. You're just as much a victim in this mess as I am." Jack could hear her ragged breathing on the other end. He knew how much it was tearing her apart. "I want you to understand that this changes nothing between us. I'm still your dad, and you'll always be my pumpkin. I poured all my love into you kids all these years, and I'm not about to stop now unless that's what you want." At this point, Emma broke down completely, and her sobs rendered her almost unintelligible over the phone. "I love you, Daddy. I don't need anyone else but you. Jack cautiously told his daughter that he didn't want to put her on the spot, but she was his best source for DNA information. He assured her that they wouldn't delve into other matters so she wouldn't get caught in the middle, but he needed to know if she had any DNA matches. She sighed and confirmed that Amanda Anderson turned out to be her half-sister. Jack was astounded and asked if she meant Amanda, Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan's daughter. She softly replied affirmatively. Jack reassured her that it was not her fault and she never had to apologize to him ever. This revelation meant that Robert Anderson, whom his kids knew as Uncle Robert and the rest of the world recognized as a prominent judge, was Emma's biological father. Damn. This also implied that Linda had been involved with her boss when he was an attorney at the law firm. This meant it must have happened at least 25 years ago, considering Emma was 24 years old now. At that time, Linda used to work as his administrator. Robert left the law firm to become a state judge a few years later, eventually moving to the state capital where his career really took off. Linda, on the other hand, didn't pursue a romantic relationship with Robert. She stayed at the law firm and eventually became the office manager. However, during the few years they worked together, Robert and his wife Susan became such close friends with Jack and Linda that their children still referred to them as Uncle and Auntie, and their kids called Jack and Linda the same. On a few occasions when Jack was away on business trips, Linda and the kids would spend a few days at Robert and Susan's lake house. It never really raised any suspicion in Jack's mind, and the kids even talked about Aunt Susan taking them places without him or Linda. Jack was deep in his thoughts when he heard Emma calling out to him. He apologized to his daughter, telling her he got lost in thought and thanked her for her help, asking her to say hi to Michael, her husband, for him. Emma then asked him what he was planning to do. Jack admitted to her that he wasn't entirely sure, to which she advised him not to do anything incredibly stupid. She said a little foolishness was okay, but warned him against doing anything that might get him arrested. Jack hadn't entertained thoughts of harming Linda until that moment, but he had promised Emma that he wouldn't get himself arrested, so he guessed that ruled out any thoughts of violence. He never broke promises to his kids. Ever. Jack's top priority was to calm Emma about their relationship, and then he needed to find out who Linda's partner in crime was. The third task on his list was to initiate divorce proceedings, but he'd have to find a new lawyer because his current one was affiliated with the firm where Linda worked, which was definitely a no-go. After meeting with a lawyer and getting things in order, Jack would then have to deal with soon-to-be ex-Mrs. Linda Walters. The house felt chilly and empty when Jack and Linda were together. She could talk non-stop, probably due to nerves, Jack supposed. She really put an effort to keep him content, probably thinking it would soften the blow when he eventually found out the truth. It's hard to say for sure, but there was definitely a growing distance between them, and she wasn't making any effort to bridge it. Around a week later, Jack consulted with one attorney. As soon as the attorney learned that his wife was the office manager at the law firm, his expression turned anxious, so Jack moved on to the next lawyer on his list, a young woman in her 20s who simply smiled when he mentioned Linda's position at the firm. This was the type of attorney Jack needed, someone who wouldn't be intimidated if one of the high-profile attorneys acted as Linda's representative. Jack shared what little he knew about the infidelity situation, starting with the revelation that his youngest child wasn't biologically his and was, in fact, Robert Anderson's child. Court of Appeals Judge Robert Anderson, his attorney, Anna, asked. Jack nodded, closely observing her reaction to see if he should consider finding another lawyer. It must be quite a story, she remarked, and they delved into the financial aspects. Given their solid jobs, pensions, and benefits, Anna suggested splitting joint assets equally, retaining their pensions, and selling the house. This would leave both of them financially comfortable, though Jack would be in a slightly better position due to his higher income and better pension. Anna added that unless Jack was dead set on seeking revenge over his spouse's infidelity, the child, or just a lack of respect, they could have their reckoning for sure. However, Jack replied that he didn't want to hurt Linda financially despite feeling wronged. Anna then inquired about pursuing legal action against the judge involved, noting that it would be much more complicated and time-consuming. Jack retorted, perhaps a bit harshly, that the judge was his concern, and he would handle it his way. Anna understood and suggested that if Linda didn't contest, the issue could be resolved in 6 months, but if she did, it might take more than a year. Jack told her that he hadn't set any deadlines yet, so she should take her time and do it right. With the third task completed, it was time to move on to the fourth, the confrontation. Jack waited another week just to see if Linda's conscience would get the best of her. During that time, Saturday night was their usual date night, followed by watching a movie and sharing an intimate moment. However, Saturday night was always a particularly special occasion for them. They hadn't been out on a date in 2 weeks, and it had been just as long since they'd been intimate. After finding out about Emma's paternity, Jack couldn't bring himself to go through with it. Linda didn't question it, which was another sign that she knew he was aware, but she was quite skilled at putting on a facade. However, that was about to change. Jack decided to take her to a fancy French restaurant where they enjoyed a bottle of wine and indulged in some delicious desserts. She seemed happier than she had in weeks. Upon returning home, he carefully helped her out of her coat, guided her to the kitchen table, pulled out a chair for her, and uttered those famous words, "We need to talk." Linda offered a half smile as Jack poured himself a Jack Daniels on the rocks and offered her a drink from the liquor cabinet, which she gracefully declined. Placing his drink on the table, Jack locked eyes with her and said, "The floor is yours." Linda reminded him that it had been a long time since she and Robert were together, about 20 years, and asked if they could consider it a mistake from the distant past and move on. Jack was relieved that she didn't dispute the DNA test's accuracy, but her attempt to brush it off as ancient history seemed dismissive. He pressed for details, asking about the timeline and frequency of her affair with Robert and whether their first 2 children, Mark and Alice, were also his. Linda clarified that Mark and Alice were Jack's and that her involvement with Robert started about a year after Alice was born, lasting around 3 years. She explained that it ended when Robert left the firm to pursue a judicial career, ensuring his background check was clean. After their breakup, they only had a few encounters at the lake house when Susan took the kids out, with Susan being oblivious initially but later learning the truth. Linda mentioned a reconciliation meeting where she and Robert promised Susan there would be no more intimacy. Frustrated, Jack asked Linda why she never tried to have a peaceful discussion with him and if he was just a spare part to her. She replied, wiping her hands on her sleeves, that she knew she could never tell him because he would have filed for divorce immediately, claiming she loved him then and still does. Jack couldn't help but remark on her apparent love for Robert more, noting that she started and stopped with him at his command, seemingly considering Jack only as a backup plan. Linda protested desperately, insisting that she loved Jack with all her heart. In response, Jack accused her of having loved Robert with all her heart, sacrificing their relationship for his career dreams while knowing Jack was her fallback option. He pointed out that while she might have had some love for him, she was aware of how much he idolized her and relied on their family to cope with his absence. Linda's gaze falling to her knees seemed to confirm this painful truth. Regarding Emma, Linda confessed that during her affair with Robert, she hadn't considered the consequences until the DNA test revealed the truth. She assumed that since both she and Robert had brown hair, brown eyes, and fair skin, no one would suspect Emma's paternity. She figured Jack wouldn't question it, especially since Emma ended up resembling her, not knowing for sure until the DNA test. Jack exclaimed in disbelief, questioning if she was implying it was his fault. Linda explained that she and Robert discussed the possibility of Emma's paternity, but she reassured him not to worry due to his resemblance to Jack. She mentioned that Robert might not have known either but probably knew by now and that she hadn't heard from him since Emma and Michael's wedding 2 years ago. Linda emphasized that regardless of who knew what, Emma was still hers, insisting that she was listed on the birth certificate, raised her, loved her, and considered her her own. Linda sternly stated that Robert had better not even think about claiming otherwise and that if he contacted Jack, he should make that clear to him. Jack asserted his intention to have the other 2 children undergo DNA testing as soon as possible, explaining that he needed to know for his own peace of mind. Linda pleaded with him, insisting that he already knew they were his and questioning why he couldn't trust her. Jack shot back, his newfound distrust evident, which seemed to take Linda completely by surprise. She was also deeply troubled by the thought of Jack revealing her infidelity to their other 2 children, understandably not wanting to appear unfaithful in front of them. Changing the subject, Jack inquired about the details of her affair, asking how often it happened and where else they met. Linda began to explain that their relationship wasn't planned but developed from spending time together at work, becoming friends, and then something more. She described him as kind, considerate, witty, funny, and passionate, and mentioned they had a deep connection. Because they both had spouses they loved, they kept their meetings discreet, usually out of town, and never met at either of their houses, as that would have been wrong on many levels. Linda whispered to Jack that they hadn't been intimate since their affair ended. When he asked if Susan knew about all of this and had forgiven them, she confirmed, reiterating that she had told him before. Jack whispered, his voice tinged with uncertainty, that he didn't think he could go back to how things were. Linda tried to reassure him, acknowledging the wrongness of their actions but emphasizing that it had been over for 20 years and he hadn't had to endure it while it was happening. She pleaded for them to return to their lives from a few weeks ago, where he was her loving husband and she his loving wife, insisting that nothing had to change. Firmly, Jack told Linda that things had already changed. He shared that he had spent the better part of 3 weeks wondering what he had done wrong for her to fall in love with another man and had been questioning whether he could ever fully trust her again, let alone enough to stay married. He expressed with heavy emotion that he had given her his heart completely, and yet she treated it as something to be taken out only when it suited her. He stressed that their marriage wasn't supposed to be one of convenience but rather a commitment of unwavering love. At this point, Linda began to cry. Typically, Jack would try to console her, but this time felt different. He retreated to the family room, turned on the TV, and left her alone at the kitchen table. That night, they shared the same bed, but for the first time in a while, they didn't cuddle. Jack moved as far away from her as he could on the double bed and didn't let her snuggle up to him when she climbed in. Her face showed a mix of surprise and pain, but he didn't really care. On Sunday morning, as Linda prepared a nice breakfast and they were eating, Jack broached the topic of divorce. She practically yelled at him, arguing that the affair happened over 20 years ago and that he hadn't even known about it, urging that it was in the past and they should just move forward. In response, Jack shouted back, emphasizing that a mistake remains a mistake regardless of how long ago it occurred. He expressed his feelings of betrayal, highlighting how she deceived him, lied to him, and cheated on him, thereby violating his trust. He pointed out these weren't temporary problems. Unable to continue the conversation, Jack got up from the table, leaving half his plate of food behind, and headed outside to mow the lawn. That was the last conversation he had with Linda until Wednesday afternoon when she informed him that Susan Anderson would be joining them next weekend. Needless to say, Jack wasn't thrilled. But Susan was an old and dear friend who had gone through the same cheating ordeal as he had, so he thought it was worth having a chat with her. On Friday night at 6 p.m., Susan showed up, having traveled 2 hours from her house. Surprisingly, she didn't bring Robert with her. During dinner, their conversation remained light and friendly, and afterward, they moved to the family room with glasses of wine, presumably to delve into the main event. Susan began discussing the affair as if it were a distant historical topic, speaking calmly and dispassionately. However, as she continued, her emotions intensified, and tears welled up in both hers and Linda's eyes. Susan shared that when Robert told her about the affair, she had assumed it had ended years ago, and he had assured her it wouldn't happen again. She admitted that she was devastated at first, but after giving it more thought, she realized that since it was over before she even knew about it, she guessed she wasn't hurt too badly. Knowing that Susan wasn't some gold digger, Jack could see how it all unfolded. Robert's personality is quite captivating, isn't it? Although Jack only found out about Emma a few weeks ago when everyone else did, he understood. "I'm genuinely sorry about that, Jack," Susan said. She never brought up the few times Linda and Robert met after their initial affair, particularly at the Andersons' lake house. Jack wondered if they had informed her about those occasions, but he didn't bother to ask. It did make him wonder, though, if Robert must be an excellent lawyer because Susan seemed to be almost apologizing for his affair rather than being upset with him. Unfortunately for Linda, Jack wasn't as settled as Susan, and he wasn't as enthralled by her eloquence. So he wasn't inclined to give Linda and Robert a pass like Susan did, even though their romance had spanned 2 decades. Jack often contemplated what his life would be like if he left Linda and how it would affect him and the kids. They say you should always weigh whether your life would improve or worsen without your spouse. In my case, I believe it would be worse, Susan continued. Thank you for sharing your perspective with me, Susan. It's definitely something to think about, and I'll need to carefully consider it. There are several factors at play, including the fact that unlike you, I wasn't informed about the affair. I stumbled upon it entirely by accident. Linda knew it was wrong when she was involved with Robert and anticipated my reaction. She believed it would be better for everyone if I never found out and just lived in ignorance. That would have been the case if it weren't for the DNA test. Now, 20 years later, I've discovered that the love of my life had an intimate relationship with another man before reverting back to me, Jack said. During Susan's story, Linda remained silent, merely listening as Susan shared her narrative. Linda couldn't have known that Jack was aware of her glances in his direction, so he sat casually while Susan spoke, just to mildly annoy Linda. Jack's response to Susan's story wasn't what Linda had hoped for, and neither was Susan's. They exchanged sorrowful glances, realizing that Jack wasn't reacting the way they had anticipated. Jack shook his head, went to the kitchen, poured himself another glass of wine, returned to the family room, and turned on the big screen. It was a clear signal that their conversation for the day was done. The ladies got the hint and moved to the living room, where Jack could faintly hear them chatting. After finishing whatever he was watching, Jack switched off the TV, stuck his head into the living room, bid them good night, and headed upstairs to their bedroom. On Saturday morning, Susan cornered Jack in the family room, saying they needed to talk. Jack didn't know where Linda was, but he agreed, and they relocated to the formal living room, settling into chairs in the corner. Susan began by expressing understanding of his pain but argued that not forgiving Linda and divorcing her would be a big mistake for both of them. She emphasized that their love for each other should be what matters most and that the past is history. She pointed out the tragedy it would be for them to spend the rest of their lives apart over something that happened 20 years ago, mentioning that if she could forgive Robert, Jack could surely forgive Linda too. "I don't know if I can forgive Linda," Jack replied honestly to Susan. "Unlike your situation where you were told about the affair, Linda never told me. She knew it was wrong and that I wouldn't have forgiven her back then, so why should I forgive her now? She not only cheated on me for a few years but also continued to deceive me for 2 more decades. How can I ever trust her again?" Susan sighed, understanding his point. "I get it, Jack. It's a lot to process. But think about your life without her. Would it really be better? Sometimes we have to let go of the past to move forward." Jack shook his head, stood up, and walked out of the room, passing Linda in the hallway. She could see from his expression that he wasn't budging an inch. Dinner on Saturday night was unusually quiet. The women attempted small talk, but Jack wasn't interested. He barely said 3 words throughout the meal. After a brief thank you, he grabbed his jacket and left, informing them that he'd be at Malone's, his preferred spot for a quiet drink. At Malone's, Jack felt down and chose a table over his usual bar spot. The bar owner, like a sister to him, urged him to open up. Jack shared that his wife, Linda, had cheated, and their youngest might not be his. She was outraged and supported him, offering her blunt perspective. Jack valued her honesty. She questioned if Linda apologized for the affair or just for getting caught. Jack realized Linda hadn't really apologized. The bar owner offered Jack free drinks and arranged a cab, taking his keys for safety. The cab dropped Jack off at home around 2 a.m. Linda greeted him at the door and helped him up to their bedroom. Jack collapsed into bed fully clothed, and Linda took off his shoes and socks. That's how he slept. Late on Wednesday night, Jack's son, Mark, called him at the office. He wanted to discuss Linda's situation with him. He didn't explicitly say it, but it seemed that Linda had decided to involve the kids to sway Jack away from the divorce. Mark and Jack typically saw eye to eye on most matters, but from their conversation, it became apparent that Linda had put in significant effort, and it had paid off as Mark clearly empathized with her side of the divorce dilemma. Jack had to explain to him firmly. "Mark, what she did initially could be seen as a mistake, but after continuing for months, it became a choice. How would you feel if you found out Linda was cheating while the affair ended years ago? The deceit and disrespect didn't." Jack felt frustrated, feeling betrayed after idolizing his wife, only to find out she kept the secret. If not for a certain accident, he'd still be in the dark. It felt like she used him as a backup plan. As Mark tried to argue that Jack was overreacting, Jack hung up, feeling that the conversation wasn't going anywhere. When Jack got home around 6 p.m., Linda was already busy preparing a delicious meal. She didn't look pleased when Jack mentioned he wasn't hungry. He poured himself a glass of Jack Daniels, turned on the TV, and settled into his favorite chair. She came in and asked what was wrong. Same old stuff, different day. My wife cheats on me for 4 years, has a kid with another guy, and now my kids are making me out to be the bad guy here. Do me a favor, call Alice tonight and tell her not to call me tomorrow unless she wants to be hung up on like Mark, Jack said, raising his voice. Linda lowered her eyes. You'd think after 31 years she'd know not to provoke me on her behalf. What makes you think the divorce won't happen? Jack continued. Not only did you cheat on me for 4 years and have a child with another man, but you also replaced me in your heart with him. You can sit here and tell me that you weren't in love with him and that if he had asked you to divorce me and marry him, you wouldn't have done it. The truth is you may love me, but you're not in love with me. You're in love with him. I'm just a dependable backup because you've always known my heart belongs to you, and I'd do anything to keep you as mine. You cheated on me, lied to me, disrespected me, and now you have the nerve to try to turn our children against me. That was the final straw, Linda, but I won't be vengeful towards you, especially not to Susan, and I won't destroy Robert's promising career as an upstanding judge. I'm going to file for a divorce citing irreconcilable differences, and we can each keep our retirement accounts while splitting everything else, including the house, right down the middle. As tears streamed down Linda's cheeks and she got up from her chair, Jack couldn't help but add another jab. You never mentioned regretting your affair, probably because you don't regret it. The only thing you regret is that I found out, isn't it? The rest of the night was spent in the company of a bottle of Jack Daniels. The following day, Jack got in touch with his attorney, Anna, and told her to prepare the divorce papers as quickly as possible. She mentioned that he could review them the coming Tuesday and they'd be ready for Wednesday. Linda could be served on Thursday, but Jack insisted that her process server come to his house on Friday night. He wanted to be present when she received the papers. Next, Jack made a call to Judge Robert Anderson's office, letting his receptionist know that he needed him to return his call regarding an important matter. Robert understood the reason for Jack's call and was sure he'd call back promptly. When Robert did call back a couple of hours later, he seemed a bit uneasy. He knew precisely what Jack was getting at but preferred not to handle it at his office. Jack readily agreed and told him he'd be at his house the following Saturday at 10 a.m. Robert didn't know yet that Linda would be served the night before, although Jack was certain he'd find out by the time he made the 2-hour drive to his upscale residence. During dinner at Malone's on Saturday night, Linda mentioned that Susan had called her, apprising her of Jack's upcoming meeting with Robert the following Saturday. Linda wanted to know if Jack would like her to accompany him. Jack pointed out that this wasn't just casual conversation. George and he had serious matters to discuss, and her presence wasn't necessary. He reminded her that Robert was an appellate court judge with a sterling reputation, possibly in contention for a Supreme Court judgeship. Any confrontational behavior could lead to legal consequences. Besides, she had promised not to do anything detrimental to his career. Linda retorted with a hint of jealousy, but Jack reassured her that he intended to keep his promise and not jeopardize Robert's career prospects. After confiding in the senior gentleman at the office about his situation, Jack took a few personal hours to meet with his attorney and review the divorce papers. He gave her the green light. As he was about to leave, Anna inquired if he had any plans concerning Judge Robert. Puzzled, Jack asked why she was concerned. She replied, "Because I still handle some criminal cases and thought you might need a good lawyer. You engineers may not get too emotional about many things, but your methodical approach can be intimidating." She handed him her business card, and Jack exited her office. The next 3 days went by in a flash. They had a major project underway at the office, which gave Jack a chance to divert his attention away from his personal life. Even the old man in the office remarked on Jack's remarkable focus despite the turmoil he was going through. Jack replied, telling him that it was a relief that at least one thing was going smoothly. However, on Friday evening before Jack left, he confided in the old man about Linda being served with a lawsuit and his impending meeting with Robert. He warned him that if things went awry, he might end up in jail by Monday. The old man assured Jack of his support and pledged to provide bail money if needed. They parted ways with a firm handshake. Returning home, Jack was greeted by the enticing aroma of yet another delicious meal that Linda was preparing. Lately, she had been going out of her way to showcase her culinary talents, and Jack had to admit she was an excellent cook. Despite the strained atmosphere that had characterized their meals for the past few weeks, He made sure to express his gratitude for the wonderful dinner. After dinner, as they were about to head to the family room for some television time, the doorbell rang. It was nearly 7 p.m., and Jack had a hunch it wasn't for him, so he stayed put. Linda, on the other hand, flashed him a quick glance and went to answer the door. She opened it to find a well-dressed young man who inquired if she was Linda Walters. Confirming her identity, she received a manila envelope from him, and with a brief statement, he said, "You have been served," then swiftly walked away. Linda remained motionless in her seat, but the slump in her shoulders and the tears welling up in her eyes spoke volumes. Jack walked past her, closed the front door, then gently guided her to the kitchen table. She looked utterly shaken, exactly as Jack had predicted. They sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, although only 5 minutes had passed. Finally, she muttered, "You a-hole," and fled upstairs to their bedroom. Jack chose not to follow her. The most challenging part was behind him. Now, for one of the rare occasions since their marriage, Jack didn't sleep in the same bed as Linda that night. Instead, he retired to the guest bedroom they had set up. Although describing it as sleep would be a stretch, the woman he had considered the love of his life, his soulmate, his everything until a few weeks ago, was still sharing a bed with him despite everything that had transpired. Jack supposed neither of them wanted to be the first to make a move, but now, in his mind at least, it was all over. The following morning, Jack got up, took a shower, and dressed quietly, careful not to disturb Linda or provoke any confrontation. He didn't bother checking if she was asleep. He just collected his things and left. His attire was his usual combination: a collared shirt, a decent pair of Levi's jeans, and the custom-made cowboy boots with metal tips that he had acquired during a visit to their son in Dallas. He left a bit earlier than necessary, wanting to make sure he wasn't late for the meeting. If he arrived early, he could pass the time at the cafe, which is exactly what he did. Jack arrived at Robert and Susan's house at exactly 10 a.m. and rang the doorbell. Susan, always looking lovely though clearly nervous, opened the door. All Jack could manage to say was, "I'm sorry it had to end like this," as she leaned in for a hug. She didn't respond with words but took his hand and led him into the room where Robert had arranged his memorabilia and pictures all around. Robert was seated in his favorite chair, but as they walked in, he got up and stood in front of it. "Hey, Jack." "Hey, Robert." Susan, looking quite apprehensive, left the room. They stood about 6 feet apart, sizing each other up. There was a time when Jack considered this man almost like an older brother. That's how close they were. Robert was 2 years his senior, roughly the same height, but the comforts of the past 20 years had added about 30 pounds, most of it settling in his round belly. They had shared their hopes and dreams, had countless adventures together, gone fishing and hunting side by side. Jack used to be proud to call him his friend and was equally proud of how far he had come in his career as a judge. But now, standing before him, Robert's gaze was no longer that of a friend but an enemy. "You've got my wife's heart, you a-hole," Jack yelled at him. "You also get to keep your squeaky clean image because I promised Linda I wouldn't tell anyone about this, and I don't break promises to that woman. But you won't keep your manhood." With that, Jack took a big step forward with his left foot, planted his right foot, and delivered a powerful upward kick aiming straight for Robert's groin. Robert's reaction was slower than Jack expected, and his metal-tipped boot struck its target accurately and precisely. Jack could feel his pain as he kicked, and then he heard Robert howl in agony as he crumpled to the floor, clutching his injured area and crying out like a wounded animal. In that moment, all the rage and frustration boiled over. Susan rushed into the room, seeing her husband writhing in pain on the floor. She tried to comfort him, but his screams only grew louder. She looked at Jack with fear in her eyes. Jack reached for his cell phone, dialed 911, and calmly said, "There's been an accident at Judge Robert Anderson's house. We need an ambulance." Jack turned to leave, but just as he reached the door, Susan grabbed his arm. Jack thought he might have to defend himself, but instead of panic or anger, there was a strangely calm expression on her face. She hugged him tightly and whispered, "Thank you. We're clear on what needs to be done." Jack hugged her, left the house, got in his car, and drove home, confident that the police wouldn't be coming after him. Susan understood, and she'd explain it to her husband when he could think straight. The drive home brought a mix of relief and maybe a gut punch, who knows? After months of daily heartbreak, Jack finally felt unburdened. It's funny how realizing Linda's betrayal actually loosened her grip on his heart, allowing him to think clearly and do what was best for him. It might not have been the right choice for everyone, but sometimes you've got to prioritize your own well-being. That's what everyone else had done for the past 2 decades, so why shouldn't Jack? Sure, a part of him would always love Linda, but he wasn't going to dwell on this chapter any longer. It wasn't his fault, and it wasn't his choice. It was time to move forward. Once Jack got home, he headed to the basement, grabbed a couple of suitcases, and made his way to their bedroom. Linda followed him from the family room, asking, "That's it then?" "That's it," Jack replied. 31 years and out the door. It's a shame you're so wrapped up in yourself that you can't see how you deceived me, how you stole 24 years of my love through your deception. But I've moved past it, and I don't hate you. I don't even hate Robert, though that poor guy probably thinks I do now. I'll mend things with Mark and Alice down the road. You should patch things up with Emma as soon as you can. Those kids are missing out. Sign the papers, Linda, and let's put this behind us." Jack continued, "I'll have the rest of my things out of here in the next few days. We don't need to talk anymore. If you have anything to say to me, I left my lawyer's business card on the kitchen table." Linda stood there in shock, tears welling up, but no words came. Jack grabbed his suitcases, went back downstairs, and stashed them in the trunk of his car. After returning to the house, he packed up his belongings and departed. 31 years, just like that. The end. As it turns out, Robert managed to save one of his testicles after all. It required extensive surgery and months of pain, but they succeeded in saving one. Jack learned about it from Emma, who had been contacted by Susan trying to reach him. Susan didn't have Jack's phone number, and the rest of the family had no interest in informing him. In fact, they haven't spoken to him for 8 months now, but Jack has come to terms with it. According to the official version, Judge Robert had a mishap in his office, falling onto the corner of his fancy desk and had a rough landing, twice, ending up on the floor. The media played it down, calling it a domestic accident, sparing the details of the injury to his sensitive area. Surprisingly, he received a lot of sympathetic coverage. Jack guesses even this won't hinder Robert's chances of making it onto the Supreme Court shortlist. Linda signed the divorce papers in just a week, and last week, the divorce was officially finalized. The house will be auctioned off. Linda hasn't attempted to reach out to Jack since he left, and neither have Mark or Alice. It seems like he won't be joining the family Christmas dinner wherever they decided to have it. The old man is passing the company reins to Jack come the new year as he heads into retirement. Per the agreement, Jack will have to run the company for 7 years before he can retire comfortably with a substantial golden parachute. Afterward, the old man plans to find a buyer for the company, and Jack will get a 10% cut of that deal too. Jack has started going out and dating again after being married for what felt like an eternity. It'll take some time to remember how all of that works. Interestingly, news of his divorce spread quickly, and quite a few divorced friends reached out, expressing interest. Even a couple of Linda's divorced friends called, surprised that she let him go at all. Jack must admit it's been a nice boost to his ego. Jack sees a promising life ahead filled with professional and personal challenges. During his free time away from work, he's exploring new hobbies. One thing he's given up on is genealogy. He used to be into it, but it's no longer a pursuit of his. Jack's new life is a mix of uncertainty and excitement. The divorce, though painful, has opened up possibilities he hadn't considered before. He starts by redecorating his new apartment, making it a space that feels entirely his own. It's a small but significant step in reclaiming his identity after the years spent in a marriage built on deceit. One weekend, Jack decides to join a local hiking club. He has always enjoyed the outdoors, and this seems like a perfect way to meet new people and stay active. On his first hike, he meets a group of friendly and welcoming individuals. One of them, a woman named Rachel, catches his eye. She's about his age, with a kind smile and a genuine love for nature. Over the next few months, Jack and Rachel become close friends. They share many hikes, long conversations, and a mutual understanding of life's complexities. Rachel is divorced too, and their shared experiences create a bond between them. While Jack isn't ready to jump into a new relationship just yet, he values Rachel's companionship and the sense of normalcy it brings to his life. At work, Jack throws himself into the new responsibilities that come with running the company. The old man is there to guide him initially, but soon Jack finds his footing. He makes strategic decisions that benefit the company, earning respect from his colleagues. The sense of accomplishment from his professional life helps balance the upheaval in his personal one. Jack also begins volunteering at a local community center, teaching engineering basics to underprivileged kids. This new role brings him immense satisfaction. Watching the kids' eyes light up when they understand a concept or successfully complete a project reminds Jack why he loves his profession. It also helps him connect with the community in a meaningful way, filling the void left by his fractured family relationships. One evening, after a particularly rewarding session at the community center, Jack receives a call from Mark. His son's voice is hesitant, but there's a genuine desire to reconnect. They agree to meet for dinner the following week. The dinner is awkward at first, but as the evening progresses, they begin to find common ground. Mark expresses his frustration and confusion about the divorce, but he also listens to Jack's perspective. It's a tentative step, but it's a start. Over time, Jack rebuilds his relationship with Mark and Alice. They aren't the same as they were before, but they are honest and real. Jack finds that he can forgive Linda, not for her sake, but for his own peace of mind. Holding on to anger and resentment only hurts him, and letting go allows him to truly move forward. As the years pass, Jack and Rachel's friendship blossoms into something deeper. They both approach the relationship with caution and care, aware of their past wounds but hopeful for the future. They travel together, explore new hobbies, and support each other through the ups and downs of life. Jack looks back on his journey with a sense of gratitude. The betrayal that once threatened to destroy him has, in a strange way, led him to a more authentic and fulfilling life. He's stronger, wiser, and more attuned to what truly matters. And as he stands at the threshold of this new chapter, he knows that the best is yet to come. At the end of this journey, Jack reflects on the lessons he's learned. Forgiveness is for yourself, not others. Holding on to anger and resentment only weighs you down. Forgiveness allows you to heal and move forward. Embrace change. Life is full of unexpected twists and turns. Embracing change rather than fearing it can lead to new and fulfilling experiences. Value your own worth. Recognize your own value and never settle for less than you deserve, whether in personal relationships or professional life. Build authentic connections. Surround yourself with people who genuinely care about you and support you. Authentic connections are the foundation of a fulfilling life. Stay true to yourself. Always remain true to who you are. Life's challenges can test your integrity, but staying true to yourself will guide you through the toughest times. As Jack steps into the future, he carries these lessons with him, ready to embrace whatever comes next with hope and resilience. As Jack steps into the future, he carries with him the lessons of a tumultuous past, the importance of forgiveness, the strength found in embracing change, the value of self-worth, and the significance of authentic connections. With a heart healed and a spirit renewed, Jack faces a world of new possibilities. His journey reminds us that even in the face of betrayal, we can find resilience and hope. Thank you for joining us on Storytime Audio. Until next time, remember to cherish your own story and embrace every chapter with courage and grace.